Hey, Royal Oak, first, welcome again to worship here this morning. I am so grateful that you're here with us. You have been following along on our Lenten journey here through the kind of passion stories of Christ, this kind of last week of his kind of earthly ministry. And each week, I've been trying to do the sermon in a place that kind of highlights the story that we're looking at. And not only am I doing it in a place, I'm also talking with a person that's kind of connected to that place. I am today in Highland Park, Michigan, at a favorite community organization of Royal Oak First. It's a Ruthella Center, and I'm blessed to be joined today by my friend and colleague. This is Mark Irwin McCormick, the Director of Development and Advancement down here at the Ruthella Center. So welcome, Mark. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Mark, just remind our congregation about the Ruthella Center, what it is, what it does, and why it's important.
So Ruthella Center was established, we're going on 22 years now, and it was in direct response to a young person who was really only 15 at the time, had just come out to his family, and they immediately and violently rejected him. And so he was living on the street, experiencing homelessness, and was really seeking some resources that were specific to LGBTQ young people who were experiencing these kinds of things, this kind of family rejection. And at the time, 22 years ago, there was nothing in the city of Detroit. And this young person was courageous enough to tell his story to a couple of community leaders who knew that they could do something about it. And so they organized a meeting. It was actually 16 individuals. They met over Memorial Day weekend in 1999. And they brainstormed, how might we support this young person? Because if there is one young person experiencing this here in the city of Detroit, guaranteed there are others. And what they determined was we needed a safe space here in the city of Detroit that was specific to the experiences of LGBTQ young people, with an emphasis on LGBTQ young people of color, that affirmed who they are and provided basic safety net services like food, clothing, and showers. And from that meeting came the Ruthella Center, named after an extraordinary woman, Detroiter, who opened her home as early as the 1940s, actually, as a safe space to the LGBTQ community.
So what's happened over these 22 years? What's different now? Like, what's the scope of the services here, and how have you grown?
Certainly moving into a larger drop-in center space was the first priority. But in our history, we have had a transitional living program for LGBTQ youth between the ages of 18 and 21. We have played an important role with child welfare, both in providing residential foster care to LGBTQ youth, as well as training child welfare professionals in best practices in serving LGBTQ young people. We also, in 2015, established the Ruthella's Health and Wellness Center, which was a really big deal for us. And what we found through those discussions with the young people here at the center was that they were entering healthcare facilities and being discriminated against. Trans young people were being made fun of in crowded waiting rooms, not being given the opportunity to provide their preferred name. And so it became an unsafe environment, and ultimately young people just stopped going to see their doctors. And what we know is that then when somebody gets sick, it progresses, and then ultimately they end up in the emergency room, which is not what we want to see. And now they have full access to a full range of healthcare services, which they've fully taken advantage of. It's the only time I've ever seen teenagers knocking down the door to try to get to their doctor's appointment, right?
That's awesome.
But it's because they're in control of their own health now. And that's a really important and powerful thing.
One of the things that we're talking about this Sunday in particular, Mark, is the way that we sometimes have seen Jesus in the stories of the Gospels continually connect with people in his time that were experiencing some sort of social stigmatization that was separating them from the goodness of the broader community. And Jesus always challenges that, right? And the stigma around sexual orientation and gender identity sometimes has its very root in the community that has his name to it now. So can you just tell us a little bit about how the religious community has either knowingly or unknowingly kind of helped create the situation that Ruth Ellis is responding to?
Sure, absolutely. And I think it's important first and foremost to say that it's a complicated issue.
It is.
And so religion has played a role.
Right.
Religion, I wouldn't put all the blame on. But what we know is that, especially in communities of faith that tend to have more conservative beliefs, we know that there is further stigmatization towards LGBTQ identities, from openly acknowledging those identities to the opportunity to access the same resources that other members of the congregation would have access to leadership opportunities within the church itself. And what this signals to families and to young people is that they are less than. They are not part of this community in the same way as their friends, families, and neighbors. And for those of us who are part of the community, that leaves a lasting effect on us and our ability to connect with communities of faith in a meaningful way. And it's incredibly unfortunate. And what that also does is provides families with rationale for not accepting their own children in the same way. And again, we know that society and culture plays a huge role in this as well, right? And so it's not just religion, but religion has an incredible opportunity to shift that and to change how families react and respond to their children.
And how have you seen that? What's the good news of that? Because I know you're engaging with more and more faith communities who are recognizing where they've been and looking to say, what can we do to partner in a way that looks more like Jesus?
Absolutely. So I think that the first thing is creating a space, not unlike Ruthella Center, quite honestly, that is a safe space for all people,
Preach.
Right? So when I'm driving down the road and I see, the different signs in front of churches that say, we are open to all, there's a part of me, the cynical side of me, that questions whether or not that's true. So my advice to all churches, to all faith communities, is to reach out to those members who openly identify as LGBTQ and get their perspective, understand what their experience is. Because while we want to be affirming and we say we're affirming, that may not necessarily be how people are experiencing that in the congregation. And so that's the most important thing, get that perspective. But the second component to that is there will be families who will struggle with this. So the more we talk about it, the more we provide opportunities to learn about spaces like Ruthella Center or learn about the experiences of members of our congregation, I think the more inclusive, the more supportive, and the more safe those spaces become.
We're a church that we like to collect things to support our mission partners. If there's some ways that we can support your work through getting you some of the things you need in order to keep your center open, or just some things that come to mind that we might be able to just say, hey, we can get those things to you. What would be some ways we can support you?
So really, a couple of things. So non-perishable foods are great. Ruth's Pantry is our food distribution program. Another thing that would be really, really helpful is Visa gift cards, really in any denomination, from $5 to whatever makes sense for you. But there are times when families and young people are facing a utility being shut off, or needing gas money, or just being able to get ahead of the game. And when we can provide access to Visa gift cards to be able to support those efforts, we know it has a huge impact in their lived experience right now in that present moment. And then if you ever are traveling, or you've stocked up on those travel-sized toiletries or the ones you get from hotels, save those. We'll be happy to take them. They're great for one-time use.
You have followed a call into some, this is hard work. What's your joy?
We're not working with young people who are needy. We're not working with homeless youth. We're working with young people who have not been afforded the same opportunities that every other young person has. These are extraordinarily talented, creative, resilient, and positive young people. They have impacted me in ways that I can't even begin to explain. But watching a young person, even in foster care who lived with us at our residential facility for 3 years, age out of foster care with us as a young trans woman, to then go off to college and get her bachelor's degree, and then go off to get her master's degree, and now compete with me for my job. That's the goal, right? Watching that over and over again over these last 10 years while I've been here at the center has been the greatest gift I could ever imagine. And I'm inspired by Ruthella, the woman, every single day.
Once again, Mark, we just want to thank you for spending some time here together with us today. And we want to thank you for allowing us to show how the Ruthella Center really highlights the story from our gospel this week. You're making Christ's love real. And we just hope to follow you as you follow this one that made life and love incarnate in our life. So thank you for your ministry and your mission.
Thank you for being here.
We appreciate you. So I'm here right now in the community space of the Ruth Ellis Center. I'm in the presence of this beautiful community mural that just displays the kind of color and diversity that this organization embraces and seeks to provide. I'm here in a place where people gather for community and safety. It's kind of like our fellowship hall or our gathering space. It's where people come to share a meal and share conversation. There's a dance floor here that keeps people connected to each other. And I'm here today because the story that we encountered this week, well, it made sure that we came here. Because this place embodies the very story that the gospel puts up for us. We've been spending our Lent time hanging out in the last week of Jesus' life. The church has traditionally called that last week his Passion. And as we have discovered that passion, well, it's the kinds of things that we're worth living for and sometimes dying for. They're the things we're willing to sacrifice for and the things that we are willing to take a risk for. The story this week is really called the First Supper. I know when we usually talk about the last week of Jesus' life, we're very familiar with what we've called the Last Supper. That usually happens on Holy Thursday. It happens in an upper room. It's with the breaking of the bread and the sharing of the cup. But we often forget that there was a dinner the night before. And it happened in a home that a man named Simon was throwing a dinner party and invited Jesus. And in the midst of that party, a woman shows up, uninvited. And everybody didn't know what to do with her presence in that space. Although Mark's gospel that we're using doesn't say much about this woman, other stories in the other gospels say that this woman had some sort of stigma or some sort of reputation that upset and confused people as to why this holy man would be so intimately connected with this uninvited guest. We've been talking about risk. That following Jesus is really about risk. And in our story today, this woman took a risk by showing up, by saying, I want to be a part of this community. I want to be in the place where love incarnate is present. So she just showed up. She took a risk. That happens anytime somebody shows up in our community for the first time. They're taking a risk. They're saying, here I am. Will you accept me? Will you love me? Can I just be me in here? And the woman in this story isn't the only person who takes a risk. Jesus took a risk. It takes a risk to show up, and it takes a risk to stand with. And in this story, we see Jesus clearly against all of the other partygoers, against all of the other disciples around him who stand in kind of confusion about what to do at this moment of this uninvited guest into their house and into their party. Jesus clearly says, I see her, and I welcome her, and what she has to offer, well, I'm not going to turn it down. So in that moment, both the woman and Jesus take a risk. It's a risk to show up, and it's a risk to stand with. And we know what's at the heart of that risk. It's the risk of being rejected. And there isn't a person listening to me today that hasn't had that moment of fear in their life at some point, somewhere along the line, that by showing up or standing with, the people around you are going to say, you can't be a part of us. I mean, think of all the things we do in order to avoid being rejected. Think of all the sacrifices we make in order to fit in. And the greatest sacrifice of all is the sacrifice of being true to ourselves. We'll try to be anything other than ourselves sometimes, if it means I can find a place here. And so here we have this Jesus character, this love incarnate, this one that we call is the one who shows us the way, taking the risk with the one who took the risk to say you can belong. Did you notice in the story what the woman shows up with? It says she carried a gift. It said it was a jar of expensive, it said the word nard. I had to look it up on Wikipedia. What is nard? You can't find nard in your local grocery store anymore. But what it is essential oil. And Lord have mercy, we know essential oils are around right now, right? And she had an expensive jar of it. In fact, it said it cost her over a year's wages to have that gift. Remember last week, we just told the story of the widow who showed up at the temple with her 2 little pennies. It was all that she had, but she gave what she had. And this week, we have a woman show up with what she had worked and toiled for a whole year of her life and said, this is what I have to offer. And she broke it, and she poured it out, and she gave it to Christ. Jesus saw the gift that she had to offer. When everybody else around stood in judgment, wondering why this woman was there, Jesus saw through it and saw the gift. The truth of the matter is, judgments, they're deadly. When we make assumptions and judgments about people, we assume we know who they are. We assume that we know their motives. We assume that we know what they've been through. We make all these assumptions, and all of those judgments actually come right from us. Our judgments are based on our own experiences and our own biases and our own hurts and our own habits and our own hang-ups. And we project them out onto others as if we know them when we don't know anything about them. So that dinner party was full of all of these people who show this uninvited guest who other gospels say has a reputation in the community, stigmatized because of something in her past or something in her identity. And here she shows up with this expensive gift, and everyone around there's like, wow, that was a waste. Again, what Jesus is able to do in that moment is see the woman in the fullness of her humanity, in the fullness of her personhood, with the gift that she had to come, and he invited her to share it unabashedly. I mean, the scripture says she broke it open and poured it out all over him, and it left a smell and aroma in the room. It was shocking to see someone invited to be so fully present with their gift. Think of how often we render people invisible because we don't let them fully show up in the fullness of who they are and with the gift that they have to offer. That's why we need organizations like the Ruthella Center to remind us there needs to be spaces in our life, and please let there be spaces in our churches where people don't need to be invisible. I know as a pastor, and you know as a church, that just as it is a risk for people to show up and say, this is who I am, this is who I love, this is how I identify, this is the gift I have to offer. We know that sometimes standing with is a risk too. I know that we and I sometimes get accused of being single-issued, that my desire to build an inclusive community, especially for our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, is sometimes too much and too focused. And yes, sometimes I have given in to the pressure and the judgments and have kept quiet when I shouldn't have. But every time I do that, and every time we do that, we render people invisible, and they aren't able to bring the fullness of themselves and their gifts to our community. And if I take this story seriously, and the Jesus who sits at the center of it, I want to see like he sees. And I want to invite like he invites. And just think of how our community would be without the gifts of Kim and Shannon, of Brian and Mike, of Tim and James, without the gifts of Lacey and Amy, without Robin and Melissa, without Garrett, without Chris and John, and the many others who have searched for a church and a place that says, I just want to show up and offer my gift. And I just want you to see me. And I just want to be a place that's welcoming. And we know that the more we're able to do that, well, the richer our community is. Well, I don't know if you noticed in the story, but the uninvited guest who showed up, she's the only one in the whole darn story who seems to know what's about to happen to Jesus. She's the only one who really gets it. She's the only one who comes in and says, I want to anoint this man because I know the trials of his standing up. I know where he is about to be headed. Everyone else around there has heard him talk about it and they don't believe it. But this woman shows up and says, I get it. And all that has been our experience. That so often when we open the doors to those who have yet to find a place in the faith community, they come in saying to us, this is what we think the church should be like. They get it. And they remind us of who God really is and what Jesus was really all about. So every time we don't keep those doors open, every time we don't risk the willingness to stand with, not only do we miss the gift, we also miss those who will come in with maybe a fuller expression of who God is because they've had to know God and trust Christ outside of the confines of the religious community in such a way that, man, if they really show up, they really get it. So here we are. In the midst of this journey that calls us to take risks to show up. And I want to say to every single one of you listening here today, I want to encourage you to just keep showing up. showing up with everything that you have to give and everything that you have to offer. I'm not saying we're going to get it right all the time, but I want you to know we are working to try to stand with you in every way, shape, or form. And I want you to bring that expensive gift that is yours, that literally costs you your life to get. And I want you to risk coming here and saying, I want to share it. In fact, I want to break it open. I want to unleash it. I want to pour it out so that this place smells of the goodness of acceptance. I don't know if you listened to my friend Mark, but I heard him loud and clear. The antidote to judgment is curiosity. He said, be a good listener. Ask people about their experience. Ask them about their journey. Ask them what they need. Ask them what they want to give. I imagine the only way Jesus was able to welcome this woman so unabashedly into the place is because prior to this, he had that very conversation with her. He knew her because he'd taken the time to listen to her. And while the world around him judged her, he stayed curious about the gift that was within her. So Royal Oak First, let's risk curiosity. Let's risk welcome. Let's risk showing up, and let's risk standing with. Because I want to say to every single one of you, you are a risk worth taking. And that's what this season is all about. So thanks for keep taking these journeys with your pastor down to these places where we can see where God's light and love is coming to place. And if you want to find more out about the Ruthella Center, please look them up online. And if you want to do any of the things that Mark suggested that we can do to support them, let us know, because we want to stay connected to this organization, because we want to go anywhere where Christ's love is made real, and it is made real right here. Thanks for showing up today. Amen.